Uh, so based on my minor reading and experience over a period of time, my humble perspective is that the West never actually thought nor tried to question the different aspects of life and society and what they entail until much later when most of the values has already eroded, which then resulted to the current understanding of what is important over what in a family unit and more within the society, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. So my question would be, what is the underlying epistemology or understanding of the West and the majority of the world that led them to see early marriage as a problem that need to be tackled while there is barely any mention of early sexual relationship among those they consider to be minors but are puber? Sorry, I had to write it because it's a little important, I think. I've seen that there is barely any mention of early sexual act among the within the West. So I thought that if that is the case, they seem to be then that the aspect they are against is not really the sexual act per se, but rather their status as married. So if it is the case, then what is marriage for the West? Since I'm not living in the West, I don't really know, like, how do they view marriage as a status for, let's say, 17 or 16 or 15 years old? Because we know for a fact that someone could be married while also still go and study. They could still do almost anything. So it is weird to think that they're against people that are married, but there's barely any mention of people doing sexual act in this early age. So thank you for listening. Sorry for the long talk.
No problem. So I don't think there is real marriage. Like, the concept of marriage in the West is completely meaningless. And they really haven't reconciled this idea. What you're referring to is that they're very sexually active from a young age. If you go onto YouTube, you'll see. Can you actually mute the caller? Because it's a lot of background noise. If you go onto YouTube, you'll see videos from second graders, people as young as children as young as 7 or 8, giving dating advice. How to, find a girlfriend, how to find a boyfriend. This is something that exists within Western society, and now it's online for the entire world to see. So they haven't reconciled this idea that children are supposed to be sexually active or having these kinds of relationships with the opposite sex, because co-ed sexual education or co-ed education happens from kindergarten, basically, from 4 years old in the West. So you have a situation where boys and girls are supposed to interact and mix and even have romantic relationships from a very young age. But you have a big problem with marriage. You have a big problem as a society with marriage happening at a young age. How can you reconcile this? And within the West, certain countries and states have an age of consent for marriage. They had an age of consent for marriage as young as 7 years old. In the United States, for example, Delaware as a state, the age of consent for marriage was as young as 7 years old. And in countries, it could be anywhere from 10, 11, 12 years old. And only recently, they have raised the age to 18 years of age. So they recognize, at least on some level, historically, that this was a practice, and children at that kind of age can get married because that was the age of consent that they had within their law, within their legal system. But now it's seen as something that's abusive. It's seen as, well, you can't really consent to marriage until you are an adult. Okay, what does it mean to be an adult? What age does someone arrive at adulthood? These are disputed issues. These are disputed questions. And there's no real answer that the secular West can give. Why? Because if you just base it on science and biology, a person becomes biologically capable for sexual activity within at pubescence or very shortly before pubescence. Okay, so this is a biological fact, and if you're a hardcore materialist or a secularist, and you only accept what science tells you, then that means you'd have to accept the viability of marriage of children who are at that kind of age group. And this, you'd have to ask yourself, why did human beings evolve with this kind of maturity for reproduction at a certain age, unless it was fitness enhancing or evolutionarily adaptive? Okay, there must have been, if you have a Darwinian perspective as a hardcore materialist, then you'd have to acknowledge and accept that there's some kind of evolutionary benefit or fitness benefit to early sexual activity. And this is what causes a lot of headache and problems for psychologists and for the Western mind in general, because it's stuck between a cultural norm that's changing, a feminist norm that's saying that no, later and later marriage is only acceptable because that's the only point where someone can be technically mature enough. But biology says something different. Evolutionary biology says something different. And therefore scientific psychology says something different. So they are trapped in this kind of contradiction. I don't know if that addressed your question, but those are the things that just came to my mind.
Thank you very much. That really addressed my question.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, brother. Do you think there's there is in the West, maybe particular, this movement has actually discouraged people from getting married or having children, or perhaps I don't know. I mean, yeah. Do you think this sort of thing has encouraged the women to go through this movement, has encouraged or discouraged them to have children, or basically maybe there are other things like sexualization of children as well due to this movement, and other things like fundamentally in terms of not only rejecting their physiology and their biological makeup, like in their demands for equality, but what are the major, harms to community and society that feminism has actually has had an impact on the society in such a way that it has, like you said, destroyed families, destroyed their own nafs, their own soul, their own spirituality. Not only that they have lost their salvation, but they have lost their self-respect in this dunya as well. Do you think some of these things are true?
Yeah, definitely. The main damage to families is that you are delaying marriage, because women have been given this message that you have to pursue career advancement. And if you do not pursue career advancement, then that means somehow that you're a failure in life. And so when you're pushing career advancement, that means going through a certain kind of graduate education, secondary education, and that takes time. And when that takes time, you have to delay your marriage, right? You have to delay even looking for marriage. So there's an epidemic of women who are in their mid to late 30s and 40s, who they are very accomplished when it comes to having degrees, having a master's degree, PhD, college degree, whatever, with honors, have climbed the corporate ladder, are making a lot of money, but they can't get married. Why? Because, well, now it's too late, because you don't offer anything to men who want to get married. The men who want to get married usually want to get married much later, or they want to marry someone who is able to provide them with children. And when you're 35 years old as a woman, or in your 40s, your biological window is very small, or is almost completely shut by that point. You can't have children, or it's with difficulty, and maybe maximum you can only have one, maybe two children. And so the man that you want to marry, he doesn't care if you have a PhD. He doesn't care if you have a good salary, or he shouldn't care. But most men really don't care about that. Men want to marry women for a different set of reasons, which we can talk about. But so these women, there's an epidemic. They can't get married because they have passed their biological window. And this is not a cultural construction. This is biology. This is what we're seeing across cultures that become feminist. The average age of marriage is much lower in Muslim countries. And in non-Westernized countries, non-modernized countries, the average age is much lower. Feminists think that this is a big problem, that we need to, and this is what many of these NGOs or these $10 million gender programs are all about. They want to raise the average age of marriage because they think marriage is such a bad thing. But this is completely contrary to Islam. In Islam, marriage is one of the biggest blessings in life, and it is the avenue to many pleasures, right? Because when you're married, you have sexual access, and that's one of the most wonderful things in the dunya that you can experience, and it is perfectly halal through marriage. So why do you want to delay it, especially when you're most, where hormones are raging and you are at the peak of your, sexual fertility at a younger age, correct? So why would you want to delay that? It makes absolutely no sense, especially for women, because your peak value on the sexual marketplace or the marriage marketplace is when you are younger. So you are actually shorting yourself if you delay marriage. And all of the standard stereotypical objections that people have to early marriage are so easily debunked. And we can talk about that. Like, oh, well, Muslims can't get married young because they're not mature. Okay, well, why are they not mature? It's because you've adopted the same kind of upbringing of the West that infantilizes youth. And when we look at the history of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the seerah, you have Sahaba who are as young as 12 years old, 13 years old, going to battle, fighting for Islam. You have generals within Muslim armies who are in their teens. Okay? They have that level of maturity. How did they get that maturity? Okay? Or were they not also human beings? We're human beings. They had that maturity because they were brought up in a certain way. They weren't infantilized in the same way that Western culture infantilizes youth. So if people are not mature by their late teens, early 20s, they're not mature enough to be responsible to get married, then that's not a problem with marriage. The problem is with the way that people are being brought up. So that needs to change. These problems are systematic. And they can't be addressed except through a systematic approach.
Indeed, yes. What would be your message to those Muslim feminists who somehow self-interpret the passages of the Quran, saying that this was actually, the exegesis and the commentaries are mostly by men, and their patriarchal society, that's the reason they have been misinterpreted. So we have to now redefine and reinterpret those passages. That's the reason you get people like Amina Wadud and all, who actually want to lead the Salah as imams, you see. What would be your message for them?
Just shut up, find another line of work. Stop wasting your time. No one cares what you think. That's my message.